Good morning. I made it. I made it back in time. Made it back in time. It is Thursday, and I need a haircut again. My hair's starting to fan out from underneath this hat. You see it? You see it here? We don't want this. We don't want this. We got to get another haircut. Okay, haircut it is. Time for a haircut. I just hate looking like that. It looks weird, like I'm taking off to fly or something. Anyway, um, I think this is a good one to end the week on, and because I hear a lot of people um, talking about Christians and whether or not they should or shouldn't vote or all that stuff, and what's our involvement in politics and how involved in politics should we be, and blah, 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 blah. This is going to be my interpretation of what I think Christians, based on what the book has said, okay? Because there are no statements in the book that said you should not. So I want people to be clear on that. I'm not saying that the Bible says you should vote. I'm not saying the Bible says you shouldn't vote. The Bible doesn't mention voting because that's not a system that was implemented back then. However, we are talking about governmental entities. And so we are going to talk about God and the government. Now, the question isn't whether is God in the government. The question isn't whether or not the government is following God. The question here is, what is God's role when it comes to the government? Now, I know for a fact that I have quite a few things open right now that speak to this topic of God and, you know, the government. I'll start off with this. In Daniel 2, verse 21, it says, he changes times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. So for anyone who thinks that God is not either interested or involved in the displacement or the lifting up of governments, you might want to read the Bible a little more, since he is the one that puts people in positions and takes them from positions at his desire. He will allow even people, his own people, to go through things via a governmental system in order to teach them a lesson. It is crazy to me to think that we then ought not to be either involved, interested in, or be aware of what the government is doing. Now, I will say, overall, there is one law that we follow more than the law of the land, and that is the law of life that Christ gave us. And once you follow that, you find yourself automatically abiding by certain laws that have to do with human interaction. The problem we find is that we have people trying to make the government their source for godly intervention. You know what I mean? Like they think that the government ought to be the way or should be involved in doing God's work. He has his own government and he's the head of it. He has control, but you don't get to put, the government is not their role is not for them to implement his kingdom. It's his role to implement his kingdom. The governments are there for a whole separate reason altogether. They are there because they have end time prophecies to fulfill. If you remember correctly, there were at least a couple of incidences in the good book where, speaking about the kings and the governments at the time, people got fed up of waiting on God. Okay, so let's read that out of 1 Samuel chapter 8. Okay, Samuel had two sons. The older was Joel and the younger was Abijah. When Samuel was getting old, he let them be leaders at Beersheba, but they were not like their father. They were dishonest and accepted bribes to give unfair decisions. One day, the nation's leaders came to Samuel at Ramah and said, "You are an old man. You set a good example for your sons, but they haven't followed it. Now we want a king to be our leader, just like all the other nations. Choose one for us." Samuel was upset to hear the leaders say they wanted a king, so he prayed about it. The Lord answered Samuel, "Do everything they want you to do. I am really the one they have rejected as their king. Ever since the day I rescued my people from Egypt, they have turned from me to worshiping idols. Now they are turning away from you. Do everything they ask, but warn them and tell them how a king will treat them." I will say this about the current world situation. All the fighting over who's going to rule here and who's going to rule there is really, just like God said, a rejection of God raising up kings. That's what this is. It's a massive rejection across the board of God. And if you want any proof of that, look no further than the laws that have been passed by people that we want as opposed to God. Look at the laws that get passed when people forget God and accept man's rule and wants man to do everything. What happens at that point? Almost everything antithetical to God gets passed. You don't find that kind of odd? They ask you to depend on the government instead of depend on God. They ask you to trust the government instead of trusting God. You look for a blessing from the government instead of God. It hasn't changed. Who they're really rejecting is God. So then what's the Christian's role in all of that? Should we be the kinds of people that are involved in the transition of power from one person to another? I think we should be interested in it because it does concern our welfare. But here's where we get too far. And I don't think it's a matter of whether or not we should or shouldn't vote, whether we should or shouldn't be involved in elections. I think the bigger question is, how much trust are you putting in that individual versus how much trust you're putting in God when you do your election duties? You're given the right to vote. Okay. Two candidates are in front of you. One candidate follows a little closer, not fully, a little closer to biblical standards than the other. How many of us pray about what you should do, as opposed to, well, God said this and this is what this person, and how many of you pray before you decide who you're going to vote for or if to vote? Corey and I decided that we were not going to vote this year. We received all kinds of backlash because we were saying, "Oh, you don't understand. God put Trump here," and God, in our world, just like we ought to, if God is in charge and he raises and brings down, he's in charge. Our vote, with or without standing, he's in charge. We made our decision based on something he said, God. We are not willing to put our human vote behind something that is obviously an affront to him. So it's what you call making a discernment of decision making. I'm allowed to or not to. We decided not to. From that point, God is in charge of everything else. The people wanted a king. He gave it to them. Samuel told the people who were asking for a king, what the Lord had said. If you have a king, this is how he will treat you. He will force you on your sons to join his army. Some of them will ride in his chariots, some will serve in his cavalry, and others will run ahead of his own chariots. Some of them will be officers in charge of 1,000. The others will be in charge of 50, while still others farm the king's land and harvest his crops or make weapons part of his chariots. Your daughters will have to make perfume or do his cooking and baking. The king will take your best fields as well as your vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his own officials. He will also take a tenth of your grain and grapes and give it to his officers and officials. How does that go today? Let me think about this. That sounds an awful lot like how governments here in America work, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound an awful like when you hand things off to man, what happens? Now, I understand what the founding of the country was based on. I get it. But just like with everything else, when man is the arbiter of something and is not proclaimed that God is the arbiter, even though the Constitution says so, people take liberties with certain things. And here you have the situation right now, exactly like they're talking about in the times of Samuel. Do they not do this as well? Do they not tax you? They tax the mess out of you, don't they? And they can take your field whenever they want, right? They send you to war, do they not? There's a draft, is there not? Send you to war. They have you make weapons, don't they? Everything that's happening here in Samuel. So don't tell me that God is not involved in governmental stuff. Because just like back then, he shows you the difference between him appointing people over you when he picks them versus when you want something, how it turns out. There's a massive disconnect in the Christian walk today. You see, we look at people and think if we elect that person, that is going to be the king and that's going to be the linchpin to make everything work well. Instead of saying, what about if God decided this? I know people are saying Christians should vote. Okay. And it depends and it depends. And I'm not saying we all have ideas of what we think will happen. But how many of us are actually praying about this to have God decide who the next person in charge is? Suppose this is all in an effort to have you come back to him to make the decision belong to him. And regardless of who wins, he still is king in your life. Because right now things are bad. I can admit that. It's horrible. But I also know who caused it to be horrible. It wasn't God. But in the horrible, I have to find peace. And the peace is him. It doesn't stop the stupid stuff going on. Absolutely not. They're still killing babies. They still allow a whole lot of stuff, that predatory things on children. They still allow all of it because we've given our power away from God to man. The king will take your slaves and your best young men and your donkeys and make them do his work. He will also take a tenth of your own sheep and goats. You will become the king's slave. And you will finally cry out to the Lord to save you from the king you wanted, but the Lord won't answer your prayer. The people would not listen to Samuel. No, they said, we want to be like other nations. We want a king to rule us and lead us in battle. Samuel listened to them and then told the Lord exactly what they had said. Do what they want, the Lord answered. Give them a king. Samuel told the people to go back to their homes. You see, sometimes the thing we want is only coming from a place that is inside of us. We, not God. We, us, them, not God. Not God. We do not actually want to come back to our first love, if we even had him as our first love. For all intents and purposes, we see there are things that are violating God's law. We understand it, okay? So if you're looking at this as a Christian, we see stuff that is blatant violation of God's law. So here's my question. Are you deciding to pick the lesser of two evils? And I'm not calling one side or the other more evil than the other. I'm talking about policy-wise. Look at it like this. If one side only is for abortion, more taxes, gender reassignment, and LGBTQ, okay, that's what one side is for. The other side is only for the allowance of LGBTQ, but is against the other three. Which one are you going to vote for? Are you going to vote for the one that has the -3 or the one that has all four? We will first say, well, he's against abortion. That's good. He's against taxes. That's even better. But he still has LGBTQ, and he's not for gender reassignment. Are you going to vote for him because he doesn't have the other three, or you're not going to vote for him because he still has one thing he's clinging on to that's still anti-God? See, that's our problem here. That's not really a problem for us. This is my stance. That's still something that one of the candidates are holding on to. While I agree with everything else they do, that one thing, if that wasn't the thing and it was taxes, I would vote, happily vote. Even if it was for higher taxes, I would have. But that spiritual matter is a big spiritual matter because it has to do with spiritual things. And hence, I want God to make that decision. I'm going to stand on his word and not indulge in what he says to not indulge with. So I'm not going to pick that. And from that point on, since he raises and brings kings low, I'm trusting him to do it. I don't want my own. I want him to pick it. I want him to pick it. This was Israel's problem. They wanted what they wanted because they did not like the way things were. And just like God said, who they're really rejecting is God. Who we really are rejecting is God by depending so much on man. The other example we see in the book is this well-known story, okay? Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 3. The king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and his breadth was 36 cubits. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, sent to gather together the princes and the governors and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar, the king, had set up. Then the princes, the governors, captains, judges, treasurers, counselors, sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of that image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Keep reminding you that Nebuchadnezzar did this. Mind you, people put Nebuchadnezzar in power. Just to understand, this is not a God ordained one. Okay, I want to make sure everybody understand this is a worldly government we're talking about in this situation, like we're in now, a worldly government. And we're going to deal with some people who believe in God. Then a herald cried out, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And whosoever falls down and worship shall the same hour be cast. Who shall not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all other music, all the people, all the nations and language fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Wherefore, at the time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews, they spake and said to the king, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, harp, flute, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image, and whosoever shall not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image thou hast set up. Did you see something weird in this whole description here? What exactly? Who exactly, I should say, were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Who were they working for? Who appointed them? You don't find it kind of weird that these men were Jews? They followed the living God, but they were set over the affairs of the province of Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. They were involved in the government, were they not? The government set them in that position. There are certain Jews whom thou has set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were following God, but they were not appointed to that position by God. The king put them there. They were involved in politics. They were involved, and not just involved, they were put into positions over provinces. And their king was dealing with all kinds of ridiculousness over there, building altars and idols. So, right off the top, it tells me that, yeah, we definitely can be involved in it. But where's the line drawn for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Even though the king appointed them, they were involved in government, they were in positions of leadership. They only held God, though, as the arbiter of right and wrong. Nebuchadnezzar came with a decree that was completely antithetical to God. Completely. What did they do? Now remember, this is Nebuchadnezzar. They heard the decree. They knew exactly what he said would happen. They are under his leadership. They were appointed by him. All intents and purposes, your job is to do what your boss tells you to do. This is a governmental position. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they do not serve your gods, and they don't worship the golden image you set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you don't want to serve my God, nor worship the golden image I've set up? Now, if you be ready, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all other music, you fall down and worship the image I have made. Well, but if you worship not, you're going to be cast in the same hour into the midst of the very burning furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? What just took place was a declaration to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to place their allegiance in the hands of Nebuchadnezzar or die. I don't care what God you follow. You've heard that today? I don't care what God you follow. Listen to us. We heard this all through 2020, did we not? We heard this all through. In fact, they told you, even I don't care if you believe in God, you're going to take what we're going to offer you as your mainstay. You are going to trust what we're going to give you. You're not going to trust your God. In fact, they told churches that you couldn't have anything to do with your God until you follow what we say. Did they not do that? And what did the churches do? Did they stand up like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? No. Nearly zero churches had the spine to say, throw me in the furnace. Because they were all taking money from the government and they were very little reliant on God. They bowed. But then they want to talk about having God as their leader. When the test came, they didn't follow him. For all that talk about trust, meanwhile, you have here men of God who were appointed to offices by a corrupt king, an evil king, looks him dead in the eye and says to him, nah, we're good. We ain't going to do that. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king and said, oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. You know how bold-faced you got to be to tell the man, whatever, bro. You obviously don't know our God. You obviously think that you have rulership over us. You seriously think that you're gonna scare us into worshiping that thing? You've lost your mind. You have lost your mind, Nebuchadnezzar. You are totally gone if you think I ain't gonna be careful answering you. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. You don't got no power over me. Very few. And I mean, you can probably count on a hand how many churches stood up to a decree to tell you you can't worship without following a man-made law that requires you to distrust God. All these laws that man have passed right now in this government, are you following them even though they are antithetical to God's law? And I'm not talking constitution. I'm talking about God's law. You see what the church is also bowed to? The church's law is wavering because they've said, oh, the LGBTQ agenda needs to be accepted in churches. What do? Accept it in church. Why? Because they're getting money from the government. Now the government is their God. Whatever the government decrees for them to do, they do. And now we've had this conflation where we think that if we do anything to do with the government is God. But that's not true. We are supposed to abide by the laws of the land until those laws become antithetical to the king's law, God's law. The instant you pass to me a law for me to try and have to do because it is what you want, but God doesn't want it, I am not following that law. I am telling everybody now, I do not care. If you decree a law that's antithetical to my God, I am not following that decree. Firing squad, you can bring them on out. Don't care. I'm not following that decree. It's not going to happen. On no planet is it going to happen. While I abide by the laws and I'm supposed to render to Caesar the taxes, all of that I will do. But the instant you tell me to go against God's law, like Nebuchadnezzar was asking, we're done. God is the one that rises kings up and brings them down low, and I'm trusting him more than I'm trusting man. Voting takes a way second precedent to his arm. So let's see what happened with these three. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image thou hast set up. Even if, I knew I loved that song for a reason. Even if we're not even going to bow down to it, we're not, regardless of what the outcome is, Nebuchadnezzar, we know he's fully capable. He is able to deliver us from that fiery furnace. But if he does not deliver us, oh, well, we're still not worshiping you. We're still not following that golden image. We're still not listening to you. It's not happening. Kick rocks. Find some other lemmings. It ain't going to be us. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more. 7 times hotter. That 7 is a wonderful pick of a number too, by the way. And the commandment he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. These men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot. The flames of the fire slew the men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I will say this, it might not be funny to you. It might not be funny to you, but I'll tell you why it's funny to me. In all of man's efforts to counter God's point of view and God's decree and laws and who he is, in all their efforts, they end up burning themselves. They end up burning themselves. Here you are telling your strongest men, this is your strongest men, and in all your rage, make the furnace 7 times hotter. You don't, this is how stupid power makes you. This is how stupid you become when you follow your own way and not God. This is how dumb Nebuchadnezzar was. I'm telling, the man was an absolute moron. Listen to this. You put the furnace to 7 times hotter, then you ask your men to take people to the furnace to throw them in. How close you got to be to throw them in? You so dumb that you sent your men to death, or you're so evil that you didn't even care. All of them burned up. The ones that were taking Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the flame, they got burned. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said to the king, yeah, true, we did. He answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God? Whoa, whoa, Nebu. Pump the brakes, Nebuchadnezzar. Real quick. Quick question for you, Nebu. Can someone tell me how he know? Can someone tell me how he knows that he said the 4th one, the 4th one looks like the son, his form is like the Son of God? How do you know what the Son of God looked like? You see, when God wants you to know something, that, well, look, this is how God flexes, okay? When God flex, he flex big. I'm gonna tell you this: when God flex, he flexes big. He don't flex small. God shows his power like, okay, look, there's one thing I tell people: don't mess with him. You don't want that man flexing on you. You remember how he flexed on Job? Y'all remember how he flexed on Job, right? How Job talk, everybody talk, and then he shows up and he's like, who is you? Who are you talking to? You don't know who I am? Like, did you all forget something? Like, when you hit every stupid stick falling down, you forget who I am? Were you there when this took place? Oh, you weren't there, huh? Did you give this animal this, and this? No, you didn't do that. Oh, did you cause the morning to? Did you cause the sun? Did you cause any of that? That's what you call a flex. That's what you call a flex. This is on a whole nother level. Somebody who was just talking about, I don't care what God you serve, screw that God, whatever, forget him. I don't care about him. All of a sudden now, you throw 3 men in the fire, you see 4 of them, and you know who the 4th one is? All of a sudden, you know who the 4th one is. I just find it kind of weird that all of a sudden you know. No, God made sure you found out who it was. God told you who that was. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then they walked out of the fire. And the princes, governors, and captains and king's council began being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair on their head singed. Neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire passed on them. I want you to understand this. The furnace was 7 times hotter than it had ever been. It killed the men who were throwing these men into the fire. Again, when God flex, he flex big time. You walk out the fire. First of all, they see you walking around in the fire. And you're walking around in the fire with somebody else that wasn't in the fire to begin with. They didn't throw four, they threw three, and you have another one walking. And this man looks over and says, "Oh, come on." And you just waltz out the fire like nothing happened. No clothes burned. You don't smell like fire. No hair, nothing. It was like you were never in there. Okay? You were never in there. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielding their bodies, that they might not serve or worship any God except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, language, each speak anything amiss against the God mm, mm, mm. Hmm. Man, you know, what would happen if we were to say no? What would happen if we as believers said no? No, we're not going to abide by that law because that law is completely antithetical to our God. And I don't care what punishment you issue me, I'm not doing it. What if we were to do that? Do you think we could possibly change the mind of the people in power? You see, we somehow that's why I say we put our man-made things before God. We think to change policy is the best way. I'm not saying it's an option, it's always an option. But if the base of that policy change isn't God, there's nothing changing. Because so far, most of the policies that are being passed in government are to do with people wanting this and people wanting that and wanting what. Hardly any of it is to do with God at all. If it were about God, you would never hear about abortion being a thing, ever. You wouldn't. But we have come so far from putting God before government that we won't even try to see whether or not he is actually involved in it at all. Because we've separated the two. We have separated the two. We have said government is here and government is government, and God is here and God is God. While that is true on one level, God is still over government. He is over all. But what you're really trying to do is separate him from government so that you can have your own little world that you live in and still say you belong to him. You can abide in everything the world does because it's the government that told you to do it, while disobeying whatever he told you to do because it's the government. God, I'm here. I'm in the world, but not of it. I still love you, but they're telling me what to do because I have to. I live here. I can't. I don't have any choice. Well, God, the church has to have a 501c3 because the government said we need to. I mean, yes, the government will tell us how we can and can't do things, but that's the government, God. We still love you. No. Either God is God and God of all, or he's not. You making the separation between government and him is your way of keeping you in your own little space and keeping him separate. Unfortunately for you, that is not how God functions. Whether you see him as overall or not does not negate the fact that he is overall. And he will lay low who he has to lay low when he wants to lay him low. Again, I don't think we really want God to start flexing. But his time is coming to flex. And when that flexing starts to happen, you're going to see a whole lot of people start running for the hills, saying, "Well, I didn't realize he was this much of a deal. I should have listened before." Too late. Too late. He's going to implement his government at that point. You will have no more say. As it is today, no problem with the voting process, participating in government. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were appointed by a king, a corrupt king. What they never did was cross-contaminate. They never put the king above the king. They never put that king above the king. When that king started to show and bring things to light that he wanted them to do that was completely against the will of God, they said no, even to death. Meanwhile, here we are, afraid to stand on business. We're afraid to stand on business. We are afraid to stand and say, no, I'm not, because God said no. We're afraid to tell people, no, LGBTQ, nope, can't do it. Why? God said so. We're afraid to tell people abortion is wrong. Why? Because God said so. I'm not, no, it's bad. It's murder. I'm not doing it. Nope, I'm not even going to stand by and say anybody can do it. No, that's even worse. That's even worse. You are supposed to speak out about it. Unfortunately for Christians today, we pick and choose when God's valuable and leading. We love to have this concept of separation of church and state. Stand on that if that's what you're going to do, though. But decide for yourself which one of those two is more important, church or state. Ask yourself the big question. Whose law should you be following above all else? Is it God's law or the law of the land? Because only one affects the other positively. If you follow God's law, there will be an automatic following of a law of a land. But also when you follow God's law, you will not disappoint God, who is the most important one of the two. However, when you follow man's law, the law of the land, it quite often contradicts God's law. And you're putting yourself in quite the hole. Quite the hole. Quite the hole. And that's fine. Hear me out. All of that is fine. You know why it's fine? I'll tell you why it's fine. It's fine because our investments should be heavenly, not here. That has been a tool to keep us attached to government. Not going to lie. They give us all kinds of free stuff to make us feel attached and obligated to them. Hence, you will end up fighting for your own demise and not realize it. You fight for their leadership over things that you should be trusting God for. How many things do we trust the government for that we should be trusting God for? I want you to think about that one. Because all too often people have put government as God. Now, I'm not saying that there have been good kings, presidents. There have been. All I'm saying is that in all our effort to try and recraft this government system to match God, you and I are not the person to do it. God is. If you remember correctly, and we read it in Samuel, God already had a process set up. He had people in charge. He had judges. The people did not want that. The people wanted something else. And for all the warnings, they still wanted what they wanted. He gave them over to their stupidity, and they end up suffering and paying the price. Where do you think we are now? We have gone so far away from God's judgment and said, no, we don't want yours. We want what we want. He'll give it to you. Have it. But also take the punishment that comes with it. What do you think would happen if no one voted for either candidate who would decide who is president? If I were to go based on law, it would automatically fall to the delegates to do so. The electoral college would end up picking anyway, and they would only base it based on who is more prominent in the state. However, if I were to go based on what God said, I just leave it to God and be cool with whatever happens. I just leave it to God. If we say that he is the arbiter of all, and whatever happens, he is still God, then it doesn't matter. And also, if he says that what is going to come is as a result of government overreach, going to become so pervasive that there are going to be massive wars that bring about the end of time, then we should be looking at this from a different perspective. Instead of looking for the government to give us peace, we should be looking to the government for signs of what's to come. And they've been giving you signs. They've been wanting to have wars everywhere. Wars, rumors of wars. The government is doing their part at his behest. He's already told you what's going to happen. The book has told you what's going to happen. Here we are trying to stop it from happening. We're stopping it from happening. But you can't stop what's coming. You can't stop what's coming. The only place you can find any calm in this is abiding. That's it. If you know God is in charge, what are you worried about? Earthquakes and tornadoes and this sign and that sign and eruptions and wars and conflict. He told you. Why y'all freaking out? He told you this was coming. We're over here worried about how it's going to happen. And how do we delay? I would like him to hasten it, but it's not my call. Do you really want God's government? Do you know how you get God's government? This is how you get God's government. Allowing God to do what God got to do and stop trying to interfere. Don't put man's law above his law, and you're going to get God's government. But yes, God is involved in government, and he foresees everything. He allows what he allows, and he doesn't allow what he doesn't allow. And since I don't know what he's going to allow, but I do know what he has told me to abide by, that's what I'm going to do. I have no concern about what the boss is doing. That's not my job. I didn't create the company. I'm simply a worker. My boss has yet to disappoint me. He has an amazing retirement plan. He takes care of his employees. I don't care what my boss does because my boss is doing what his company needs. He is the head. I don't care what my leader, my king is doing because my king is God and his rule is flawless. And as long as the kings of the earth go against his law, I do not follow what they say. I don't have to argue with nobody about it. I'm just not going to follow it. It's that simple. They can take whatever law they got and put it back where the sun don't shine. I'm not following it. Neither should you. You want to call it rebellion, whatever you want to call it, but I'm following the king, not a president, not the Senate. I am following God. I don't need to be rich. I don't need to be known. I don't need to be heard by man. I don't. I don't need to be accepted by man. I don't need to be loved by man. I love God. God loves me. And I abide by his decrees, not man's. They could come this year because they're already planning on this, by the way. They're already planning on telling you that you need to shut stuff down because of mpox coming in. I want to see what the church is going to do now. I want to see if the church is going to kowtow to man telling them you can no longer worship. I want to see if they'll do it now. Again. I want to see if they'll tell you you cannot go to work unless you take this. And I want to see you tell them, I prayed and God's got me, and they fire you, and then what you're going to do? Or are you going to go ahead and take what man tells you and not trust God? How many of you are going to ask him what to do? Man will always test you. And don't forget that in the book that you also you read, that what's coming is the mark. The best way for people to take the mark is to have a track record of doing what the government says. Because at the end of it, the Antichrist is going to lead the government, and he will be telling you what to do. If you have a track record of following said statements, you're going to take the mark. For all of your praise and say, I love God, I love you, going to end up taking it because you think that there are two separate things. I have to work. I have to eat. I have to. So I have to do what the government, and the government is telling you to do something that will put you out of heaven. And you're like, that's okay, because I get to work. They already tested on you once and you failed miserably. They tested on you a second time and you failed again. When that test eventually shows up, that will be the mark. Unfortunately, I think many will still fail. And they will come with the same stupid excuse too. I had to work. I had to provide for my family. I had to have this and I had to have that. Just say you don't trust God. It's easier to say it. I don't trust God. But how am I going to buy? How am I going to eat? He told you already in his word, I take care of the lilies of the field. Why wouldn't I take care of you? I clothe them. Feed the birds. Are you not more important than they are? I've told you that. But you and your ignorant behind saying, no, I got to do this because I got to eat and I got to work and I got to. Go ahead and take it, though. If they tell you, the government tells you to do it, and you feel the need that you have to do it in order to eat, then just make sure before you take it, you flip God off and say, I don't need you. Because that's essentially what you're doing. And just understand that once you've done that, that's it. I hope people understand the gravity of what's coming by trusting government more than God. Understand that if you do that is written, and you decide to take that mark, understand the consequences of that. You're not coming back from that. I hope that's clear enough. I hope people understand that clear enough. I really do hope people understand that. This is more than just listening to what the government says. If you are not discerning God's word against what the government is issuing and you're not putting God ahead of it, you're going to fall and you're going to take it. I just want people to be that when you make that choice, make the choice. And it starts now. Make the choice now that God's law is higher than man's law. But if you follow God's law, you will automatically stay safe. Because at the end of time, there's only one person that has control over where you end up, and that's God, not the government. And he will put an end to earthly governments, which tells me he has all power to do it, which tells me he's monitoring it, which tells me that he is indeed involved in it, which also tells me, just like with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you can be a follower of God and be involved in government. The question is, are you involved in government for the sake of government or for the sake of God? Are you going to stand up in government to stand up for the things of God, or are you going to kowtow to the ways of man because you have to appease everybody? This is the biggest problem with being in government without God while saying that you're a part of God. We have many of them that say they are believers and they do not stand up for the things of God under the statement that God said not to. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did. They not only told Nebuchadnezzar, we're not doing it because we follow God. When was the last time you heard someone say that in government? For all the God they talk about, they get sucked into government and they become part of it while still trying to proclaim that they know and trust him, and they don't. It's a dangerous field because it will cause you to pick. Shadrach and those other two picked correctly. The question is, can you? The reason they were able to pick correctly is because they put God above all else. And because of their trust, they managed to not only walk through a fiery furnace, but change the king's heart to the point where they became even higher up in government. In either case, people, if you want to be part of government, put God's criteria above all else. And if there ever comes a time where you have to decide between what man wants and what God wants, choose God. I take whatever policy leans on God's side, plain and simple. I weigh all of it against the will of God. He puts very plainly what he requires. It's in the book in no uncertain terms. It is not that difficult to weigh what man is offering you to what God is offering. It's not difficult to weigh it. What we like to do, though, is put little caveats and say, well, he didn't really, and that's not really what he didn't really say. We like to pull the devil thing. Did he really say? Well, the Bible doesn't fully address abortion. So, I mean, there's that. He doesn't say to not kill, even though, I mean, the book does mention the prophets of Baal and them, and them burning children and sacrifice. I get it, but it doesn't say not. It doesn't have the word abortion in there. I mean, the word homosexual it's a really convoluted word, and so we make all kinds of excuses to pass off the things of man as the things of God. We're really good at that. We're really good at that. Really good at that. Man, we are proficient at making the excuses. This is what I ask you to do, okay? going to read in closing Joshua 24. Okay, let's go to Joshua 24. We'll go from 14. All right. Let's go from, actually, no. Where would be the best place to start from? Okay, let's go to 14. Now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Ammonites in whose lands you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It is a very simple plan, people. While God might be in government, he is not the government. He has his own. He may have his people, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in governments, but the trusting factor lies of them in God. When the government goes against God, they go against the government. It's that simple. And if your people don't do that, I'm not putting you, I can't put my name behind you. I'm not doing it, because my name is now attached to the name of God. I represent him. If I say I represent him and I put my name behind somebody like that goes blatantly against, I cannot call myself a child of God. I'd be just like Samuel's kids. I'm rebellious. I'm not doing that. I'm not putting my name behind somebody who I know blatantly, directly is putting themselves antithetical to the will of my Father. I'm not doing it. There are some that are obvious and some that are a little bit harder to see. That's the choice you have right now. The blatant one is pretty obvious, that are calling for abortions up to 9 months and have no problem transitioning your kids. That's a blatant, and they're happily doing that. There is no way I'm putting my name behind you. Ain't no way. Even if I was slightly deluded, it would never happen. That for sure I'm not doing. That one's as obvious as a nose on my face. The other one is very subtle. No, we're not for all those other egregious things, but we are all humans and we have to learn to live and love each other. And so we will welcome the agenda of the LGBTQ. And we'll give you what you want. Sorry, Bob, but you're still on the other side. You still can't get nope. I cannot put my Father's name behind that either. For all the other benefits you have to the earthly government, I have to put the heavenly government ahead of that, which means that if you're going against the heavenly government in any way, shape, form, or fashion, I cannot put you in power, because I'll be putting my name behind it, and my name is vested in the Lord. Can't do it. Can't do it. You could be a really cool cat, real nice guy, down to earth. You have the best interest of the government and people in heart. Yeah, I get it. That's a worldly thing. Perfect. But I do not serve the world. I serve my King. In it, not of it. And if I don't put the will of my Father above all else, I'm not serving him properly. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm simply giving you what the Bible said. We say we read it. We say it's the inspired word of God. The Bible says it. The example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego should tell you right off the top that if you think that you're part of a kingdom that is going against God, you separate yourself from that kingdom, even to the point of death. Even to the point of death. Are you ready to do that? Are you? I guess we'll find out. I guess we'll find out. I may be on tomorrow. I just found out that my piano move is changed. But I also have been like dog tired. Like real real tired. So I might rest off tomorrow. But if you do see a show pop up tonight, because he might wake me up and say, "Nope, you're doing you're doing this," and I'll be like, "All right, let's do that." So if he drops something on me, I'll let you know. If he doesn't and he gives me a day off, perfect too. I will not complain about either one. Let's just put it that way. I will not complain about either one. I was late today because I was moving a piano. I have one that might happen tomorrow, but I also have one on Saturday. So there's a whole lot going on. But if you ask me to do it, he's gonna get it. Okay, so we'll see. Today's Thursday, yeah. So we'll be back. Don't forget, Too Strong is on tonight with a very big topic. Tune in tonight for Too Strong, and tomorrow for Savage Patriots. It's a Koi day. Again, it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. Just know it's not for everybody. But I do think people need to understand something about the dynamic of our Savage Patriots platform. It's different. We're not like everybody else. We are contentious. And we don't take stuff lying down. Okay? We don't take stuff lying down. That's just who we are. Okay? You fire shots, we're going to fire back. Sorry, it's what we do. People may not like it, but it is what it is. Okay? So in either case, love you guys, mean it. I'll let you know if I'm back on tomorrow, but for sure, Too Strong tonight. Check it out. Be there. Be square. I don't think of anything else. Kurt should be getting that. We just got confirmation last night that everything got sent to the account I set up from GoFundMe. So today is the day I'm going to be sending everything out to him, and we'll be good. And I'll get an update from him as soon as I get that going. So again, thank you all for all that you've done, all the prayers, everything. It's been amazing. Love you guys. Mean it. Have a grand rest of your day. Wisdom calls to you from the streets. Please, please, please find wisdom. Peace.
Hold tight, the dreams, for if dreams die.